Hi, within this section, we're going to learn about a very important concept called functions. And we're going to see functions advanced, functions practical usages, functions inputs and outputs as we generally do. And we're going to finalize this section by learning a very important concept called scope as well. I'm going to explain what are those, and I'm going to explain how you can use them in your code during the lectures. And we're going to use these concepts a lot. So now if you're ready, let's get started. Hi, within this lecture we're going to finally learn about functions and methods. So let me create a new Python notebook from here and rename it as functions and methods and tell you what are functions actually and why do we use them. So functions are actually coding blocks, okay? We write codes that we want to be executed when this function is called. So this is a little bit vague, I know, and you will understand better when we do it in an example. And also, you might be thinking that what's the matter with the methods? So what are the differences between methods and functions? Actually, they are the same thing, but methods are defined in classes, in objects, and we will see them in the next section when we deal with classes. Okay? So right now, focus on understanding the functions and their usage areas. So let me show you a little bit of function examples. For example, if I have like this variable myString until, okay? And remember, when we deal with strings, we have done this, myString dot and hit tab, it will give us many options. And we talked about this before, and some of them are actually methods, right? So if we did like capitalize, or if we did like strip, if we did like upper, it performed, it executed some code over it, okay? So let me do it with upper, because I already have it capitalized in here with a capital A. So if I do upper, and remember I have to put parentheses over here. What if I don't put parentheses? If I don't put parentheses at the end, it won't execute the function, but it will show us the function, right? So it says that there is a function called string.upper, and if you want to execute it, you know what to do. So if I hit Shift Tab in here to see the documentation, it shows me the documentation, it shows me the explanation of this returns a copy of converted to uppercases. Okay? So I know that if I execute this with putting parentheses at the end, it will just return a copy of the string uppercased to me. So let's do that. Let's put a parentheses here, and it will close the parentheses for us. If I hit Shift Enter, now I see the until uppercased. Okay, but I see an output, right? If I call my string right now, I still see my string to be lowercase as it was before. And this is happening because people who wrote this function or method designed it to be this way. So we have to just assign this to a new variable like myString upper, and if I hit Shift Enter, now it doesn't show me any output, but rather save this output to a new variable called myString upper. Okay, now if I call this myString upper, I will see that uppercase version of this. So we actually have seen this before. Why I'm telling you all about this right now is that you can write these functions to save this into new variables like we did right now. As you can see, this is returning uppercase until, or you can change the original one. So it's in our hands actually, but we'll see that in a minute. So for example, how do you understand what a built-in function does. So we know that if I go to .tab, I will see the options, right? And if I do Shift Tab in here, for example, let me do my string.tab and choose one of the functions in here, like is lower, is upper. I'm searching for split here. Let's see, yeah, split. If I do Shift Tab in here, I see the documentation. So I see the help documentation, and of course I can go to python.org and read the documentation from here as well. But there's a built-in function for that here, so you can surround this with help, and this gives you the detailed documentation about this method. So if you just hit Shift Enter, you will see the help on built-in function split. So this is another good way to deal with functions, okay, built-in functions, because you may think that there are thousands of built-in functions. How can I read that from python.org? How can I read that from little explanations from Shift Tab? Maybe you're looking for this help built-in function, okay? So now let's go back to our main subject. How do we use functions? First, let's see how to create our own functions, because you will understand it much better when you do it in an example. All you have to do is write this, def, okay? So def, and then the function name afterwards. So you can choose whatever you want for function name. Of course, it should be relevant because you might want to remember it later on. So all I want to do is just write hello world in this function, so I'm going to call this hello world, and then after I put a parenthesis here and with a colon. So under this colon I hit enter, and what I write here with indentation will happen when this function gets called. Okay, so this is like a for loop. Whatever you write below a for loop with an indentation will happen when this loop is executed, right? So this is the same principle here. Whatever you write here will happen. Like if I write print hello, and maybe with another line here, print world, then this function will only print hello and world. If I add a new line here and define another function, so the previous function will be finished, okay? I have to write with an indentation below this function in order to execute my commands in this function, okay? So right now I'm going to call my function. I'm going to say hello world. I'm not putting any parentheses at the end, and as you can see, this is a function stored in main hello world, and we will see what this underscore means later on. So don't worry about that. But our function is stored in our software. So if I just add a parenthesis to execute this function, it will just give me the output that I wanted before. So I can write this hello world function once and call it whenever I want in my program, right? So if I want to write hello world again, I can just call my hello world function. So this is very helpful. So this is very basic right now because I'm just writing hello world, but maybe I'm going to have to write like 1,000-line code in my ethical hacking programs and call it like 3 times. So rather than writing these 1,000-line codes and copying and pasting it, I can just call my functions. So that is where functions really come in handy. And this is not the only way to enjoy functions actually. There are really important features of that functions that we did not see right now. One of them is taking input, and the other one is returning output. And that's what we're going to learn in the next lecture. Hi, within this lecture we're going to continue learning about functions, and we're going to focus on getting an input and returning an output as we discussed before. So let me start by marking this down and give a heading here with hashes. Okay, so this will be hash hash input and return. Okay, so these are one of the most important reasons that we are using functions. So let me create a function here like hello programming this time rather than hello world. So all I have to do is just hit colon here and say print hello. But again, in another line, rather than saying print hello world, or rather than saying print world, I want to say a programming language. And I want to get that programming language input from the user. Okay? So I want to print out like hello Python or hello Java, but I want it to be given by user. So I can take an input using a function, right? All I have to do is just come here between the parentheses when I first define this function and write here whatever I want to take as an input. You can write anything you want because this will be a variable. Like you can write name, you can write your name until I will say name because it makes sense because we are asking for a name from user, right? So user will give us this name here. So it will be stored in a variable and we will use this variable here when we print out the result, right? So if I hit shift enter right now and if I call hello programming and open a parenthesis, now I have to give an input in here. If I don't give an input and hit shift enter, as you can see we got an error saying that this has a required positional argument. So we have to give it a name. So let's give Python for example and hit shift enter again, and as you can see we have this hello Python section. So let's say hello programming Java this time and we'll have this hello Java output. And what if I want to prevent this from crashing, right? Maybe user don't know what he or she is supposed to do and just give out an empty input. It will crash now, right? As it did in the previous example. But there is a way to overcome this problem, and this is a way to give an input with a default value. Okay, so when you create a function like hello programming, again, so I will call this hello program and I will just make this variable equal to Python. Okay, and this will be my default value, but it can be changed by user. So I will write exactly the same thing, print hello and print name, but now if I call this without an input like hello program parentheses and shift enter, now it will write down hello Python. Okay, but if I change the name or if I give an input right now, hello program Java for instance, now it will print out hello Java. So you can define some predefined default values to the input variables, and the user may change them afterwards when they were interacting with your functions. Okay, now you know how to get inputs from user, right? Now let's learn about returning outputs. So we talked about this return too much before, but we didn't see actually what it was. So let me create a sum function here where we'll sum some numbers. So I will get number 1 and number 2 from user, okay? And of course, I will sum them and show it to the user. So this will be like number 3 is now number 1 and number 2 combined, okay, summed. And then I will print out the result. So this is really simple, okay? So if I hit shift enter right now, and if I say sum, and say number 1 and number 2, so if I sum this, the result will be 13. So my math function is actually working. Let me try that with a negative number as well in order to make sure. So 10 minus 500, yeah, so it gives us the correct result, which is minus 490. So what is not working actually is that we're not getting an integer back from here. We're just seeing the result as a string, okay? So we just see it. We cannot do this that we used to do in here. We cannot assign this to another variable because it is not returning anything. It's just printing out something for us. What do I mean? Let me define another function here and call this summation this time. And actually, I think we have to change this to sum because sum is actually predefined function of Python, so we should not mess up with this. So let's rerun this with Shift Enter, and now let's create a summation function. And within here, within the summation, I will get number 1 and number 2 again. I will call this num1, num2, and let's call num3 and get 3 numbers at once. So within the summation function, I will sum up 3 numbers. But I will return this time num1 plus num2 plus num3. So what does return do? Let me show you. 10, 20, 30, and if I hit Shift Enter, now I get 60. Now this works pretty well too. So what is the difference between returning and just printing out the result? So let me do this. My result is summation, okay, 10, 20, 30 again, and if I call my result, I see the 60 because it's returning something, and in here in def sum we didn't return anything, we just printed out. So let me demonstrate this. My integer is now sum and 10, 20, okay, so it turns out 30, but if I call my integer, it won't return me anything, because if I call type my integer, I will see none type. So this is nothing actually. Because why? Because we are printing out the number, and when I called this sum, it just printed out the result, but it doesn't return anything like we do in here in summation. So it's just printing out like this hello world program, okay? So I cannot assign this to a variable. I'm just seeing the result, but I cannot assign this to a variable. So it is important for you to define what you will do with a function, okay? So if you're going to need the results later on, it is better for you to return the result and not just print that out. So let's move on to another example. Can we do like if statements in functions? Of course we can. We can do everything in functions. They are piece of code blocks. So let me do an example here, like df control string, okay, and I will take a string as an input, like say s this time, okay, and I'm going to control this s, and if the first letter of this string equals to m, then I'm going to make this m capitalized, uppercase, okay? So there's a way to do that, right? Maybe pause the video and try to do it yourself. I hope you got it. All you have to do is just S0 and take the first letter out of that string and control if this S0 is equal to M, okay? So if this is actually M, then we're going to say print out MM. For right now, for just an example. Let's check this out. Control string, let's give it something else like Paris for instance, and that doesn't start with M. So if I do this, I won't get any print. Let's do this with Metallica for this time. Control string Metallica, and I got out MM. So this works. Now I can just do whatever I want. Like I can make this capitalized, I can print M manually, right? So try to do it on your own again. So let me copy and paste this in here. And if this S0 is equal to M, I want to capitalize this M, and actually printing out the big M won't work because this will give me only an output of capitalized M, right? I won't see the rest of the string. So what I want to do actually, not printing out this, but printing out S dot capitalized, because I know that string has this method. I have worked with this function or method before. So if I hit Shift Enter right now, and let's try this with control string again, and let's give it Metallica one more time, and we will get out the Metallica capitalized. Okay, so let's try with something else like Amsterdam this time, and we won't get anything in return. As you can see, functions have great tools to work with inputs and outputs, returning outputs. I suggest we stop here right now, and within the next lecture we're going to continue with advanced functions. Hi! Within this lecture we're going to learn something called arbitrary arguments and keyword arguments. Okay, so let me mark this down for you, and you see how it's written and how it's pronounced, and then I will explain what they are. So first we will learn arbitrary arguments and then keyword arguments. Okay, these arguments actually let us work with more than one arguments, and we actually did that in the previous lecture, right? So we did a summation with 3 numbers. But what if I wanted to do it with 5 numbers or 6 numbers, or whatever user chooses to do? So it is easy to do it with 2 numbers. So let me create a summation 2 function in here, in which we will have num1 and num2 as input, and all I want to return is number 1 plus number 2. Okay, this is easy. So what happens if our user wants to add in a third input? Then I add number 3. But what happens if user changes his mind or her mind and actually wants to sum 2 numbers? Then we are going to use these arguments, arbitrary arguments. Okay, so how do we do that? We will use the sum built-in function of Python first in order to have a meaningful structure here. Remember, before we have messed with the sum and then change it back to sum m, right? So there is a sum built-in function. So let me just show you how it's done. So we say star args here, and then we say sum args. So we're going to sum up these arguments that our user has given to us. So let me try this with 10, 20, 30, and I get an error, okay, and it says that this has to have in a positional argument of number 2, and I think this is why we shouldn't mess up with the built-in functions of Python. So it kind of broke the original function when we first defined this sum function up there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over here to cell or kernel first. I'm going to interrupt this. I'm going to restart everything from the beginning, and I'm going to rerun these cells and rerun the cell all below. Okay, so I didn't mess up with the sum function right now, so it should work properly. So this is defined as sum m, so my sum function is how it's originally built right now. So as you can see, now this works. So let me try this one more time with much more arguments, 50, 60, 70, 80, and it sums up all of them. So it doesn't matter right now how many arguments user gives. Okay, let me show you what's going on behind by creating a star arguments function. All it has to do is just printing the arguments. So if I say my func and 1020, it will just print out the arguments. Okay, it just takes the arguments and does whatever we want to do with it. So let me try this. AB12, it just takes it and prints them out. So this arguments thing lets us work with multiple arbitrary arguments. So do we have to call these star args? Not actually, but for convention we generally call it args. Okay, but if we don't, it will still work. So let me create a new func2. Okay, my func2 is star until this time rather than args. So if I print until right now, it will still work. So let me try this. My func2 a, b, at, il, and 1, 2, 3, for example. As you can see, it still prints out the arbitrary arguments. But I really don't suggest you to change the args keyword here, because this is Python convention and other programmers might not understand what you're doing at this point. This is just to show you that it works both ways. So I'm going to just make this into a command line here by adding hash and rerunning these cells. Another subject that I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture was the keyword arguments, and they let us to create keyword pairings with values like in dictionaries when we get an input from the user actually this time. So best way to explain this through an example again. So let me create a function with keyword arguments this time. So this will be an example function, and I'm going to put 2 stars right now and say keyword arguments. Okay, key w args. And again, this time these 2 stars actually matter and key vargs doesn't matter. So I could have just name it until or anything I want. So let me print out these keyword arguments and let me show you how this actually works. So let's call our example function. Now I have to give some keyword and key and value pairings actually. So I'm going to go with the same example that we were doing in the previous lectures, like running is 100 calories and swimming or basketball is 200 calories. Remember the example, right? Swim is 200 and basketball is 300 calories. Okay, if I hit shift enter, as you can see, it printed out the keyword arguments for us. So it just takes in input as a key and value pairings and do whatever we want with it. So if I say example function and a is 1, b is 2, it will just print out this key value pairings. But how do we use it in real life examples? So maybe we want to check something is in the keys or values. We can do that, right? With a function. Of course we can. What do we have to do is just create a new function with keyword arguments and then have an if statement within this function with the function indentation and check whatever we want. At this point, actually, we don't know how many arguments, how many key and value pairings our user going to give, but we know we can control one of them, right? So let's call this keyword example or keyword function for instance. Okay, so keyword function, and it will have an input of keywords, and then I will check if the Metallica is inside one of the keys. How do I do that? I use an if statement, of course. All I want to say just if Metallica, and with a quotation, of course, because this is a string, if Metallica in keyword arguments, right? You remember in, so if Metallica in keywords, then it means that the user has given Metallica as input or key. So print heavy metal, for instance. And else if, or else, if Metallica is not in here, then all I want to do is just print out a rack is that, for instance. Okay, so I'm checking whether the Metallica is in the keywords, and if it is, I'm going to print out heavy metal, and if it's not, I'm going to say rack is that. So let's try this keyword function, and let's start with Metallica, and Metallica will be 10, Madonna will be 20 or 5, I don't know. Let's say Muse is actually 4. So it says heavy metal, so it works. If I didn't include the Metallica in here, let's do the Madonna again. It won't say heavy metal, but rather it will say rack is that. So let's say Mickey, and we get the rack is that. So we now know how to work with arguments and keyword arguments. Now we will stop here, and within the next lecture we're going to cover some practical usage of functions. Hi, within this lecture we're going to learn about some really cool built-in functions of Python that will work well with functions. So let me create a new notebook from here and change the name to practical functions. Okay, so this will let us work with functions more efficiently in our projects. What I'm talking about, so let me create a new function for you, and let me show you what we can do it more efficiently with that function. So our function will be a divide function. Okay, so this will be a simple function. It will just take in a number as an input and just divide that number with 2. And of course we have to return this to get an output, right? So if I say right now divide 10, for example, it will give me 5. So what if I have like a lot of numbers in a list like this? So let me create a list here, 1 2 3 5 4 6 7 8. And what if I want to apply this divide function to my list? Okay, so I have to divide 1 2 3 4 and 5 and up till the end. So feel free to pause the video and do it on your own. Okay, I hope you managed to do it. All you have to do is just to create a for loop in here, like for num in my list, and divide num. Okay, so it will create a loop here, and it will just divide everything by 2, of course. But we didn't print it, so we couldn't see the output. So let me just wrap it around a print function in here and say shift enter. As you can see, it divided everything by 2 and we got the result back. But what if there is a better way to do this without having to create a new for loop, for instance? We have this in Python, a built-in function called map. Okay, and we're going to see how to use it and apply lists to functions, or apply functions to lists to be more exact. So let me mark this down first. Choose markdown from here and give it a hash and a heading. Okay, so our heading is map, so we will use map like this. So write map and open a parentheses, and all you have to do is just give the function and the list that you want function to be executed on. Okay, it's that simple. So if you just shift tab in here, you will see this documentation as well. So it gives in a function and iterables. So iterables mean you iterate through something. So we generally iterate through a list or list-like objects, but we're going to do it in a list. So you have to specify the function, which is divide, and then the list, which is my list. If I hit Shift Enter right now, it will just calculate everything and save it on a memory space. So this is saved at this space on memory. Okay, but of course I can just convert it to a list and hit Shift Enter. Now I have my results back in here. So I have exactly the same result as above. So I did it in one single line. Actually, what it is doing here is to create a new list here, like my new list. Okay, let me do it as an empty list. Then rather than dividing and printing this, it just appends this results to a list. So my new list dot append, and then later on, when it's finished, when the for loop is finished, it's going to print my new list. So if I hit Shift Enter, you see now I have the exact result in here. So what I did in 4 lines up here is done in 1 line down here. Okay, so map is really good, but you have to be careful with something. As you can see, we didn't put parentheses at the end of divide function like we generally do, because putting parentheses at the end means that executing this function. If we don't put a parentheses, you see that your function is here, but if we put a parenthesis in here, it won't understand what we are trying to do and it will give us an error, because all we have to do is just give the function name, not execute it inside this map function in here. Okay, so you have to give just the function name, not with a parenthesis, not with an execution inside of a map function. So can we use map with string functions as well, like functions that control strings? Of course. So let me do our classical example here, like def control string, and this will take in a string as an input. Okay, and with that input it will just check that if string in, or if Metallica is in string. Okay, so in string, then if this is true, maybe we can just return true or print something, yeah, this is true. Okay, so I will just return true. Of course, if you want, you can just print something in here rather than returning true. Okay, so let me just check this out. So I will say control string and like Metallica, and with some nonsense in here. If I hit Shift Enter, then this works, it will return true. But if I say metal, it won't return true. Okay, actually I think we should do it like this. Rather than saying if Metallica in string, just return Metallica in string and just delete this return true thing, because Metallica in string is actually a boolean, right? It is either true or false. So if I do it like this, it will return false, so I can see the false values as well. And if I change it to Metallica, it will return true. So we did this before, you know how it works. So Metallica in string actually returns as a boolean. So now let's suppose that we have a list of strings, and within that list we have some Metallicas and not Metallicas. So let me create that list first. So my artist list is Metallica, for instance, and Madonna, and just write whatever you like in here, like Queen. Okay, and let me add something else, Megadeth, and add one last thing like Muse or something. Okay, so if I hit Shift Enter, now I have my list, and I want to just convert this to a list and apply this control string function to my list. So can I use map? Let's try and see. So control string, my artist list, and as you can see, yeah, we can use this with strings as well. So it works both with integers, strings, and whatever you want, as long as you supply a function and a list to it. So we now get the result of true, false, 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 false. So what if I want to get these elements that are true in a list? For example, if it really contains Metallica, then I want to take it and add it to a list. Of course, I can do it with for loop or something, but there is another built-in function. So let me show you what it is. It's called filter, okay? So if we filter out these results, it will search within my artist list that is containing Metallica. And it will only display the results in a new list that contains Metallica or that contains whatever we want to contain. Okay, so we can just specify this in our control string function, and it will just filter out the result and apply it to a new list. So let me just show it how it's done. So all you have to do is just create a filter function in here, like in map, and we have to specify the function name again. So this is control string, and of course the list itself. So if you run this, it will just save it to a memory, and if you cast it to a list, you will see that it only displays Metallica this time. And it doesn't make sense. Let's add another Metallica in here, like Metallica 2, and it contains Metallica as well. So shift enter in here and in here, and if you hit shift enter in here, you will see that it displayed a list which contains Metallica in string. So now you know two great built-in Python functions, which is map and filter, and if you use them when they are necessary, then you will be doing a much more efficient job than doing it on a single for loop. So now let's stop here, and within the next lecture we're going to learn about something called scope. Hi, within this lecture we're going to learn about a very important concept in Python called scope. So let me create a new notebook here and change the title to scope, okay, while I'll tell you what it is. So scope literally means scope. It's the coverage of variables. It's the scope of the variables that we are dealing with. So what do I mean with that? We can create variables in general coding area. In here we can create variables under functions and functions under functions, nested functions, and they have all different scopes. So let me show you with an example. So I created a variable called number, then I'm creating a multiply function in here which will take a number as an input, okay, and I will call this num. Then all this function does is just create a variable called number, and this is 5 right now, and this will return num multiplied by number. So whatever user is giving as an input, it will multiply it by number. However, we have two numbers now, right? We have 10 in here and 5 in here. So which one will be multiplied by num? So if you said 5 within this example, then you're right, because this is under the function. And let me just show it to you. So let me give 10, and it's going to multiply it by 5. But what may confuse you right now is the current value of number in here. So what if I want to print number right now? So does it give me 10 or does it give me 5? Because I already assigned 5 to number in that multiply function, right? But I also initialized the number value up in here without doing it in a function. So if I call print number right now and hit shift enter, what will I get? If you said 10, then you're absolutely right. But if you set 5, don't worry, I will explain what's going on behind the stage. So if I call A is 10 and A is 5, so if I print A, then it will give me 5 because I reassigned its value, right? And why doesn't it happen up in here? Because I'm assigning this number to be 10 in here and just making it 5 under multiply function only. So how does Python understand what value should it display us, or what value should it consider when calculating something? So there's a rule for that. Let me explain what it is. So let me mark this down first, and it should be pretty clear for you. So this is LEGB rule, okay? And L stands for local, okay? So this is an acronym, obviously, and L is for local and E is for enclosing. So let me just write all of this down and I will explain everything. So E is for enclosing, okay, and G is for global, and B is for built-in, okay, so a built-in variable, for instance. So Python actually follows that rule when it tries to understand the current value of a variable. So first it looks at a local level, then it looks at an enclosing level, then a global level, and then at last for a built-in level. And I will demonstrate everything with an example. So let me create a string called myString in here and call it Atil, for instance. And after that, I will create another function and call this like my function, okay? And within this function, we will have another variable, which is myString again, and I'm only assigning this value under my function with an indentation, as you can see, and this is now James. And all I have to do within this function is just to print my string value, okay? So this is my string. And that's all for right now. Later on we will just add something to this function. Now if I call my function, I will see James, because this is what is assigned under my function. But if I call my string, it still calls Atil, because this is enclosing and this is global level. So let me make it more clear to you. I will add something under my function. So this is going to be a nested function here, okay? So under my function, I will create a new function called myFunction2, and within this myFunction2 I will reassign this myString again and reassign it to be Lars, for instance. So I'm going to print that myString this time under myFunction2 and delete this, and I have to call this myFunction2 from somewhere, like under my function itself, okay? Because if I don't do this, it won't get called and it won't be executed at all. So when I call my function, it will call my function2, and as you can see, we get the Lars result back, but my string still calls for Atil. So it is following the rule. So let me mark this down in here. So this is local, okay? This is a local level in here, and it first looks for local level when it tries to find a value. And this is an enclosing level. So this is an enclosed function. And this is a global level. And as you can see, or as you understood at this point, built-in variables are already there when you first work with Python, okay? So it looks for local, and then enclosing, and then global, and if it doesn't find anything, it looks for built-in, and if it still doesn't find a value, it just shows you an error. It says that there is no variable like that. So it can be confusing at this point, but you have to remember that this works with LEGB rule, and if you're going to use the same variable, then you have to pay attention to that rule. And if it is not necessary to use the same variable, then you can assign them to be new variables, okay? Like rather than saying myString, you can say myString2 in here, or just a relevant variable name. But if you don't do this, or if you have to use the same variable for some reason, then you have to pay attention. So let me show you another thing. Let me just do it as an example and just delete the local one, and let's see if it can find the enclosing value, for instance. Then we will delete the enclosing value and let's see if it can find the global value. Okay, we still get Lars in here, so let me just make this a comment in here. So Lars is not executed. So if I hit Shift Enter right now, and if I hit Shift Enter in here, like you can see, it couldn't find Lars in my function 2, then it went for the enclosing one. And if I delete the enclosing one, and if I just rerun these cells, it will show me a till, which is the global one. Okay, so it went for one level up each time when it couldn't find the value. So let's do it backwards this time. Okay, we still have our global variable in here. Let's just undo the enclosing one. If I rerun this, I will see James, and my string is still a till in here. And if I just undo the Lars, and I will see Lars, and my string still works as a till. At this point, you might think to yourself that, what if I want to really change the value of a global variable, but I want to do it under a function? Okay, can we do that? Of course we can. So let me show you how to do it with an example. There are several ways to do it, and we're going to cover them. So y is 10, for example, and I will create a new function in here, df func new, for example, and it will take the y as an input, and it will just print out the y for a while. Okay, so we will test and build upon this as we go. So this will take the y, or we will call just func new, and it will display 10 to us, right? So if I say func new 10, it will display 10, and if I don't say anything, it will display 10 again. So if I do this, y is 5, and print y right now, what will happen? So it will just take 10, and it will just print y, because we have changed y to be 5 inside our function new. But if I call the real value of y at this point, it will still show me 10, because I changed it only under this function new, only the enclosing variable. Okay, so what if I really want to change it to be 5? I could have said like this, right? So y is equal to func new y. So if I hit Shift Enter, actually it doesn't make sense, because we are not returning anything right now. It's just printing out the y, so it won't be equal. And if I would have said return y, then this will still work. So this is 10, 5, and this is 10, 5, but now y is actually 5, because it's currently returning y, and the current value of y under func new is 5, because we assigned it enclosingly, but we returned that value to be current global value. But if it's too confusing, there is a simpler way to do that actually, and we will use that in when we deal with ethical hacking as well. So let me show you what it is. We will just order Python to take global y under funcnew. So let me rewrite this again. So y is 10, and I will create funcnew once more, and it won't take anything in here, but rather I will say global y. And then if I say y is 5, then print y, it will reassign y, but since I used the global term in here, it will take the global y up under here, and it will reassign the global y actually. So if I call funcnew right now, it will print out the y as 5 as expected, but as you can see now, if I call y, the current value of the global variable is actually now 5. So we can use this technique here, or we can use the global term in here to take global values and put it under one level below, put it in the enclosing level. So I think we are done in here. Within the next lecture, we're going to learn about classes. Within this section, we have learned about functions. And don't worry, we get to practice them a lot within the next sections. So we're going to use functions in every code, every tool that we're going to write within ethical hacking section. So now we're going to move forward to object-oriented programming and learn about classes.